This is a video on business organizations, which is in Unit 6 in Leaving Cert Business exam papers. You will see in question 2, in the long questions, the different types of questions that can appear from Unit 6, so you should be familiar with these. Now, you will have come across some of these before from Unit 5, chapter Business Startups, but this chapter looks at them in more detail. So the main businesses we're going to look at are there for new startups, so sole traders, partnerships, private limited companies, public limited companies, cooperatives and state-owned businesses. But there also are other types of businesses as well, franchises and strategic alliances we've looked at in the expansion chapter in Unit 5, and also transnational, multinational corporations and indigenous firms. So I'm going to start with sole traders first. Now, a sole trader is someone who owns and runs their own business. They make all the decisions and they provide all capital, all money in the business. The key thing to remember about sole traders is that they have unlimited liability. So unlimited liability means that they're going to be personally liable for all business debts if the business becomes bankrupt. So their savings might be used, their possessions might be repossessed in order to pay off the debts of the business. So if you wanted to set up a sole trader, you firstly decide what type of business you want to go into. Is it going to be a barber? Is it going to be a pub? You find a suitable premises. You must register your business with the Register of Businesses. You do not have to do this if it is your own name. So if your name is like MacDonald or Smith or something like that, and you wanted to set up a pub, you don't have to do that. But if you wanted to be like the pub or something like that, you must see if that name exists already. So you got to register your business with the Register of Businesses. Once you do that, you may also need to apply for a license in areas such as pubs, bookmakers, and taxis. So the main advantages and disadvantages of being a sole trader, and you would have to be able to explain an example for these, would be full control. So you can make all the decisions quickly. In other words, you do not have to consult with anybody else. You get to keep all the profit yourself. You don't have to share it with anyone. Can open and close when you like. In other words, you can decide that yourself if you wanted to work from home, for example. And easy and cheap to set up. You only may need to get a license if, as I discussed above, you're choosing a name other than your own. The disadvantages, well, the main one there is unlimited liability. So you can lose your own property to pay debts if needed. The sole trader must provide all finance to start the business up themselves. So all capital must be provided by that sole individual. You make all decisions alone. Now, you may not be an expert in everything. So you may be a very good salesperson, for example. Maybe you don't have the background in finance for doing your books or something like that and would have to employ someone. Or you don't have no one else to consult for tough decisions, which can happen in businesses. It's harder to compete with larger businesses and long working hours that it may take for the business to be a success. So that's the sole trader, and that's the definition, the liability, how it's set up, and also its advantages and disadvantages. So next are partnerships. Now, a partnership is where between 2 and 20 people come together to set up and share control in a business, and they also have unlimited liability. So it's just important to note that. And another key thing for a partnership is that you must have a partnership deed. And a deed generally contains the following, like how the profits will be shared, where the capital money is going to come from, the duties and tasks of each person within the partnership, in other words, what they do, the rules if a new partner joins, and what will happen if someone leaves or if the business has to close down. Generally, you'd have, medical, small medical practices or solicitors, something that might be partners. There's famous ones as well, Ben and Jerry's and Warner Brothers, that are partners that you probably have heard of around the world. And again, the advantages and disadvantages which are there, again, easy to set up. You can get extra money access in comparison to sole trader because there's more than one person in it. More expertise, you can share the decision making, you keep the financial information confidential. Whereas disadvantages, unlimited liability again is the main one there. You have to share the profits, whereas a sole trader gets to keep them all. Because you consult with different partners, decision making can actually be quite slow, and you may need to react to things quite quickly, so that can be an issue. Or when a partner leaves, so this is the kind of the setup stage, a new deed has to be drawn up, and there's no continuity of existence. So it has to, as I said, be redrawn. The business can't keep functioning. Now, private limited companies are next, and it's just important to note that in the Companies Act 2014, there are now different types of private limited companies that exist. So we'll take a look at them now. So you've got the company limited by shares, designated activity company, company limited by guarantee, and unlimited company. So if we start with the company limited by shares, that's a business that can actually be private or public, and it's the most common form in Ireland. It says there has a constitution. So the constitution generally contains things like the name of the company, that it's limited by shares, is there any other rules or regulations that follow. And that business is generally one that can trade in any type of legal activity in Ireland. So you can be a hotel, you can be a bakery, etc. As I said, it is the most common form of business in Ireland. It has to have 1 to 149 shareholders. It does not need to hold an AGM, so that is not compulsory. Moving on to the designated activity company, that's a business that has to be set up for a specific purpose. Now you can see activity there. It says, for example, you are a bank, so you have to have a sole purpose as to why you are set up. You can only do what it's set out to do in your article or your memorandum of association. The articles of association are like the internal rules of the business, like how it will be wound up, etc. And the memorandum contains things like the name, the objectives, the share culture for new shareholders. In other words, the external. So memorandum are the external rules for the business as well. So you can see like a bank, for example, Ulster Bank is set up to be a bank. So that is a designated activity company. Company limited by guarantee. So they kind of have members rather than shareholders, and these members directly control it. So they act as guarantors, and what they'll do is to pay a small percentage of debts when the company is wound up. They're generally like charities, sports organisations, so they also would have a memorandum of association and an article of association. So memorandum, the external rules, and articles are the internal rules. And they, like designated activity companies, must also have an AGM, an annual general meeting, at the end of the year. You see there, look, sports organisations, charities, etc. And the last one is an unlimited company. So this is where you want to keep the information private. In other words, you set up the business, you don't want to publicise your information. So again, look, they have memorandums and articles. It must have a shareholder. If there's more than one shareholder, they must have an AGM. So there can be one, and obviously you don't have a meeting yourself, but if you have more than one, you must have one. And you can see Dunstores as the example there. So you've got your different types of companies that exist. So it's just important, I suppose, to know them when talking about the private limited companies. So if I scroll down a bit, shareholders receive a dividend. Generally, the one share is one vote, etc. You see the limited liability there as well. So you'll only lose what is invested in the business. And there you have the advantages and disadvantages of private limited companies as well. You can see there's different types as well. That would obviously be a disadvantage in terms of time consuming to set up and stuff like that. Whereas the limited liability there will be the main advantage. Continuity of existence is another advantage as well. So public limited companies are next. So this is where you have 7+ shareholders, and you have directors who are voted by the shareholders, and these also have limited liability. So you must follow the rules, the laws, regulations a lot more than private limited companies can. And as well, these are kind of businesses that you would see publicised on the stock exchange. So anyone can invest in these types of businesses as well. They'll have the letters PLC at the end of it. So there are your advantages and disadvantages as well. You can notice that there's an awful lot of an overlap here in terms of like the liability and stuff like that, and profits being shared is a disadvantage. Just be familiar with them, I suppose. Anyone's there really, the corporation tax brought in here, 12.5%, is very positive, because when you're looking to pay shareholders their dividend, it's quite low in Ireland, so they'll get more money than maybe in other countries, for example. Cooperatives are next. They pool resources to achieve common goals. Again, must have 7 members at least, and they apply to the Register of Friendly Societies. They have limited liability. 1 vote per member is really the way this is set up as well. So no matter how much you have invested in it, everyone gets a say. There are your advantages and disadvantages again. You generally see these in kind of communities as well. So that employment advantage, you might, if it's a credit union, for example, you would know everyone generally or most people from the area, or has that sense of community, as I said, where you're familiar with the customer base. Again, look, all members have an equal say, but for advantage, disadvantages here are less incentive to invest because one vote is one share. Sometimes you can have popularity, as I said, well, it's a sense of community, but therefore maybe the best qualified person doesn't get the position rather than the person who is the most popular amongst people. So again, just different advantages and disadvantages there. And just the most common kind of forms of cooperatives, we've got producer cooperatives. You think like farmers, for example, they contribute money, they set up the factory and employ workers and managers so their products share profits, or as a producer, sorry, should be share profits. The worker cooperatives, people who work in a similar business, they pool their finances together to start a business, like your furniture manufacturing and house building people, or credit unions. That is the most common one. It's owned and run by its members. They want to encourage savings and provide loans at reasonable interest rates. As well, just again, profits are not the sole goal of cooperatives. Like obviously they want profits and they want to be able to pay their members out, but obviously the continuity providing services in the local community or areas and stuff like that as well is also a goal for credit unions. State-owned businesses are next. So these are formed by the Dáil and owned by the state, and they have a board of directors appointed to run them. And so again, you can see just different advantages and disadvantages there. Like providing essential services like the post office, for example. I mean, everyone in Ireland would generally use a service like that to send letters and things like that, or to get letters in through the door, or provide income for estates or profit-making businesses can provide money. Employment again, as I said, you can see. Whereas disadvantages, some businesses, for example, you can see Imrad Éireann there, because they're not really a profit-making business for people. It's a job essentially. Sometimes that can lead to lack of motivation, or if it suffers a loss, well, the taxpayers' money has to kind of be used to fund it. So again, just there's different advantages and disadvantages. I'm supposed to know now as well, when a state-owned company is sold to private sector, we call that privatisation. And if a government takes over a company, it is called nationalisation. And a question that has come up in the exam before is the opportunities and challenges of privatisation. So just have a read of them there. You should be fairly okay with them in class. I did discuss them anyway. So So look, we'll move on to franchises next. So these are other forms of businesses. So with franchises, you will have done this in a good bit of detail in Unit 5. So I'm not going to spend too much more time on it, but the business arrangement, it's a license agreement where you sell the right to use your name in return for a fee. McDonald's, Starbucks, etc. That's why there's lots of them around. There's many advantages, disadvantages. Like it's a familiar name, advertising costs will be down, etc. People know it. You can get ongoing support from the main office and stuff like that. Whereas disadvantages, you have little control. You have to kind of do what you're told to do. Entrepreneurship is not really encouraged because there's no scope to really be an entrepreneur in those types of businesses, and some profits have to go back to the main headquarters as well. But as I said, we've looked at them in a good bit of detail already. We also looked at alliances and synergy, being able to achieve more together than you would on your own. That was in Unit 5 as well. So again, just the advantages and disadvantages there, which you have looked at again. And transnational companies, businesses with their head office in one country and factories in another. So we would be familiar with lots of different brands like Coca-Cola, for example. They would be a transnational company. They're known in an awful lot of countries and not just one. So they generally get attracted to a country like Ireland because we're English speaking. It's in the EU for trade, because of free movement in goods and services. We're a highly educated workforce. Those types of reasons. So look, you can see there as well. Another advantage for the government really is getting income through PAYE, PASI, etc. Um, Again, so a massive disadvantage though would be that they're profit making. So, if, for example, they weren't making much profit in Ireland, they may choose to go to a lower cost producing country and therefore take the jobs with them. So, they're not really concerned with um, benefiting the economy in the long run if it means that their business will suffer. So, there's just again different advantages and disadvantages to be aware of. And the last one I'm going to look at is Indigenous firms, and these are founded by Irish people, run by Irish people. Lily O'Brien's would be a perfect example of that. They avail of support from Enterprise Ireland, for example, who offer grants and advice to these businesses to try and compete with businesses like the multinational ones. Um, just to kind of finish up on the advantages and disadvantages. So again, loyal to Ireland. So even if a recession comes or companies are leaving or whatever, they're if they can function, they will stay here. They'll also foster enterprise culture in an economy in a local community. They'll encourage businesses to be set up by people in the area, and the profits stay in Ireland. So that tax revenue, etc., comes to Ireland. The employment again. However, it can be difficult to compete with transnational companies, multinational companies, and sometimes these businesses have to close down as a result of that, or there can be a lot of costs that businesses like franchises wouldn't have to incur because obviously franchises are well known. They may have to do, Indigenous firms may have to do their own advertising, etc.